Yeah, thanks so much for that introduction. And this is a little bit like writing an exam, because you'll see as I move through this presentation how much of an impact Jan Bonsmara and his studies had on me growing up and trying to propagate my own way through the industry. So at the end of today, you guys can tell me whether I was paying attention or not to the man and the genius that started your breed. And it's been, you know, the stats we've just been shown after 60 years to still have that market share and it growing is quite incredible. And with Louis and Bernard at the helm of your breed and that kind of leadership, you guys are very well situated to move this breed forward in South Africa and certainly across Africa. And hopefully, when sanitary requirements and health protocols open up, there are a lot of countries around the world that are asking for these genetics if the sanitary requirements allow, especially the southern parts of Northern America and certainly South America and Australia and definitely Southeast Asia. This is not too different. This is not my talk, by the way. This is the talk before the talk. But this is quite similar to when I speak at Angus events in Australia or the US. It's a very similar market share. Those breeds dominate their industry in terms of bull sales and cow numbers. And it is incredible, but there's also a sobering aspect to that, because now you've been put in control of moving the nation's genetics forward. And there's a big responsibility that comes with that. I know Tom Lasseter, in his book, The 6 Essentials, stresses that the two most dangerous things that can happen to any breed is for it to become popular and expensive. So you've got that challenge of, you've got the popularity, you've got this, there's an ability to add premium to your genetics. The discipline is keeping your knife sharp and making sure that not everything becomes a bull and not everything gets sold as a replacement heifer. And I think also there's a, and this is my message often to the Angus guys in the US, which are, Angus and Bonsmara reflect each other very well, Angus in the US and Bonsmara in South Africa, in terms of their impact in the industry, from the genetic side all the way through to the consumer side, is that there's that temptation to take your foot off the accelerator a little bit and not be as hungry and try as hard as some of the little smaller breeds that are like Jack Russells nipping at your ankles. And I think my encouragement is to just keep doing what you're doing, but stay hungry. You know, don't ever assume that 60% market share, or what, I mean, it seems like a bit more than 60% market share here, will always be there, because everything is great until it's not great. So that's the reality check of that. But on the other side, the fact that you've managed to retain that market share after 60 years in a country where everyone likes a different flavor in South Africa. I mean, you look across all the small towns in South Africa, how many different types of chocolate or chips, or how many different churches there are in every single town. It's incredible that there's a breed of cattle that has stayed the course, and there's a reason for that. And I applaud you guys on being able to hold that together, and especially keeping that strong leadership that you've got is going to definitely drive you forward. So my theme for the day is global and international cattle market challenges and opportunities, and trying to marry that with breeding cattle for functional efficiency and profitability. And a lot of this is going to seem quite random. I'll admit, my mind has never been very well organized, and to the point, if I was to drive you to Cape Town today, we would probably stop in Durban and maybe do a little drive through the Transkei and along the Garden Route. I'm not very good at getting to the point straight, so please forgive me if it seems like I'm going off topic a bit. But anyway, like we spoke about earlier, I was born and raised on a 5th generation in the Eastern Cape, and that's where a lot of the philosophies of livestock production got instilled into me. And also, like it was mentioned earlier, this has taken me globally. I think 2 weeks ago I was in Ukraine, and that was the 112th country that I've been in and worked in, which is amazing. I mean, this is not something that I ever set out trying to do, but what every one of those stops has done is just shown me how much more we have to learn and how much more we don't know. It's a very good way of finding out how little we actually do know. I work within a big organization called Eurus. It owns these 10 genetics companies, semen, embryos, colostrum, software, and really what I do within that organization is just move around globally looking for opportunities and different solutions and just finding ways to try and add value to all these different industries. My own company is called Global Livestock Solutions. This is a consulting business where I either judge cattle shows or speak at events. I have a lot of commercial consulting clients that I'll do their genetic or herd management consulting, select their replacement females and bulls. There's an online Wagyu marketing company that I've got a part of. We do 2 or 3 sales a month, just online Wagyu sales. This is very important. This is a list of references, mentors, and influences. A lot of what you're going to hear today aren't my ideas or opinions. It's just stuff I've heard and gathered as I've been moving around the world. A lot of them can be attributed to that list of people. You'll see Jan Bonsmara is quite high up there. And a lot of these people disagree with each other and would disagree with me today too. So when we get to the question and answers later, I really encourage you guys to ask questions and challenge any of these theories and philosophies, because I actually like being wrong. I like going to the next event with a new idea in my head and seeing if I can improve on these philosophies. I also, some of the philosophies are spawned out of my own brain one way or another, and those might be the ones that you guys want to challenge later, and I'd encourage you guys to do so, because maybe those thoughts aren't properly organized yet. There's an online, mainly online course called the Global Beef Cattle Academy that I'm involved with at Texas A&M University, which is where Dr. Bonsmara wrote a lot of his papers. It's a 1-year course. If there are any young people in the industry that want a more global view on profitable livestock production, I really encourage you guys to look into this course, and we can communicate later through email or calls to get you in touch with the right people. The guy who instilled this course, actually Dr. Cliff Lamb, who's also an ex-South African Rhodesian, who's head of Agri-Life Sciences at A&M, which is the biggest animal science university in the world. So the South Africans are definitely infiltrating in Texas in several ways. I'm going to just show you several slides on the theme behind this. There are 2 themes behind this. The one is that I haven't found a phenotype or a genotype that works everywhere. So we've got to learn to adapt animals to their environment and to the management practices. And I think it's also encourages creativity amongst breeders to come up with solutions that can be profitable in those environments. Some of them just need to be tweaked a little bit. Others need a completely different philosophy. And the other thing is, you'll see my resume always reads how many shows I've judged. I don't really like show cattle. I'll put that out there right now. The only reason I like cattle shows is it's a way for me to compare animals phenotypically and through functional efficiency with a crowd watching, and I can demonstrate my philosophies. So I actually like cattle shows. I don't really like show cattle. So I just want to put that out there before anyone takes a pot shot at me. So this is just all over Brahman shows in Honduras and Canadian Charolais shows. So then we land on this slide, which is a picture of a beautiful beach in the Seychelles. And this is where my consulting journey started, probably 2000. So 14 years into breeding cattle, we were running cattle in Mauritius and Namibia and in South Africa. And I started getting asked to consult on different cattle operations worldwide. And some of that was just because we were running cattle in different environments and different breeds. So it lent itself that way. So my first ever job consulting internationally was in the Seychelles. I don't know if any of you have been to the Seychelles. It's incredible. I highly recommend it. The Minister of Foreign Affairs at the time invited me to come and sort through his herd, which was the largest herd in the country. And I had 7 days to work through this herd. So we got there on the first afternoon, and his whole herd was on this incredible big green pasture overlooking the Indian Ocean. And there they were, 22 cows. And I had to look at these cows for 7 days. And, well, the first thing I said is there was a problem. He was bringing every cow into its own individual stable every night and then letting it out in the morning. So I said to him, Mr. Pillay, this is like you're wasting a lot of energy units in terms of labor, and the cows probably just prefer being left out on that pasture. And I think from a management standpoint, we can fix this immediately. So he said, well, what do you think we make money from here? What's our profit driver? So I said, well, they're beef cows. They were like a Boere type cow. So I said, logically, it must be beef. So he said, no, our profit driver is the luxury hotels and the resorts. Every morning they come and they scrape the manure off the concrete, and they use that for their vegetable gardens and flower gardens, and that's where we make most of our money out of. And then the second thing is on some of the islands, you'll see that bull pulling a cart. You're not allowed to drive motor cars there, so they have bulls pulling carts. So the male calves end up either pulling carts on those islands, or they crush coconuts. This bull at the bottom, he just walks around in circles all day crushing coconuts for coconut milk. And then they milk the cows for their households, and at the end of their lives, then they do process them for beef. So beef was about 4th or 5th in line in terms of productivity. So that was an incredibly important lesson, because then I learned to listen before I speak, which I'm often encouraged to do that at home as well, because you think you've got this wealth of wisdom and knowledge to impart, and then you get humbled when you get told that maybe you should have listened to what the question actually was, or learned what the situation was. We ended up having some good relationships sending Boere cattle from Kenya to Seychelles. Obviously, tiny market, but maybe the place I learned more than anywhere else, because I do try and listen before I speak now. That's why I'm glad Louis spoke first, because now I can make my speech according to what he was saying. When I was running those 5 properties, one in the Eastern Cape, one in Gauteng, 2 in Namibia, and one in Mauritius, we had different managers on these properties. And this philosophy that I applied then, I still apply with my consulting customers now. And basically, if you can see on the right, there's a big walled city. So that could be a Phoenician city or a Roman city, but the theme is it's a walled city. The emperor or the king lives in the middle, big wall all around it. It's a little bit like farmers. You got your farmhouse in the middle, and your place is all fenced off. And what they would have is they'd have gates in different directions. So they'd have a north gate, east gate, south gate, west gate. And at each of those gates, they would have a gatekeeper. And that gatekeeper's job was to record the people and the commerce, the goods, services coming in and out of that gate. And once a month or once a week, however it was, the emperor or the king would get all the gatekeepers together, and they would describe his kingdom to him, a 360-degree view, so that he could see what his kingdom looked like from every direction. If a gatekeeper was missing at any of those gates, naturally that's where the problems would enter the city, that's where commerce would run out. Just one gate without a gatekeeper could collapse the entire empire. And I think from a farming standpoint, it's very, very similar. We all have the one or two disciplines that we like doing, and we tend to do them more than the ones that we dislike doing. But I think it's very important that we identify what those gates are in a farming enterprise and make sure there are gatekeepers or specialists or attention is given to each one of those gates to maximize potential coming in through those gates and to minimize loss going out of those. Divisions of a farming enterprise, especially a livestock farming enterprise, I think would be genetics, herd management, nutrition, animal health, marketing, record keeping, forage management or felt management, and then human capital or human resources. And the challenge is to understand that every one of those gates is exactly as important as the next one. Even if you're not too fond of record keeping, that attention has to be given to that. Even if your human resource management, like your relationship with your neighbors or your staff or your family or your clients, isn't something that you love doing, it's something that has to be paid attention to. And I am convinced that if all 8 of those gates have a gatekeeper and there's attention paid to it, that this can become a profitable enterprise. If you guys aren't interested in history and don't care about Phoenicians or Romans, then you can use the wheel as an example the same way. Just a wheel with 8 spokes, equal length, all as important as each other. If there's a spoke missing or one's longer than the other, the machine doesn't give you a very even or comfortable ride, and eventually you get a flat tire, blowout, and you're left stranded. So that's the philosophy there, and this theme is going to follow through the whole talk, and it's going to come down to balance and making sure that we optimize and not maximize anything. So finally, we get to actual livestock talk, which I think is what most of us came here for, and talking about cows. Another thing I've really tried to stress with my customers is that we've got to break up the traits of an animal into profit traits and turnover traits. So profit traits being the ones that keep us in business, and the turnover traits being the ones that we get paid for in terms of commodity. The profit traits, let's start with adaptability. Adaptability is the gateway trait into profitable livestock production. Without adaptability, no genes will express themselves. You can't optimize, you can't maximize any trait. And I think this is maybe a mistake that is more prominent in the US and Australia. I think South Africans do a very good job of adapting animals to their climate, but it's still something that and not just to the climate, but to management practices as well. Unadapted animals are non-starter. So what adaptability allows for functional efficiency. So you can't have functional efficiency without adaptability. And the functional efficiency is one that allows for the most important economic trait, which is fertility. And we'll get onto fertility later. There's some very good thinkers on fertility in South Africa at the moment, and I think they're leading the world in terms of really thinking about fertility. We'll get onto phenotyping fertility and also selecting for fertility later. Everyone here, your first thought is, we do select for fertility, but I'm going to challenge you on that later and ask you if you really do select for fertility or whether you're selecting against infertility. So let's think about that for a while. And then longevity. Longevity is a profit trait. The longer we can keep these cows alive and in production, the better. Their Angus breeders in Australia and the US, especially the performance guys, in inverted commas, who are trying to maximize growth in carcass, they've got 8-year-old cows that they're calling old cows. Now, I always got taught an 8-year-old cow's in her prime. I mean, that's your prime time cow. So longevity is essential that we select for. Okay, so those are the profit traits. So then your turnover traits, growth, marbling, muscle, milk, these are important, but they're irrelevant if we don't first lay the foundation with those aforementioned traits. So I just want to set that up so that we don't get too focused on the shiny disco balls and we focus on those boring fundamentals. As impressive as this structure is, it wouldn't be standing if there wasn't a foundation and a strong floor plan and it wasn't structurally sound from the bottom. It wouldn't matter what the beams look like and the roof and the fans and all of that. To zone in on adaptability, sometimes you've got to use extreme examples to make a point, and then you bring them closer. So a lot of these examples are extreme, because none of you want Nello or Scottish Highlander, maybe one or two, but I doubt there are one or two of you here. But those Nello cows in Brazil are so adapted to those northern parts of Brazil. Some of them are ankle deep in water the whole year. There's all kinds of big cats and other vermin, ticks, and insects, humidity, poor grasses. They perfectly adapted to that. The same way as the Scottish Highland cow up in the Highlands of Scotland that gets rained on and there's wind blowing on it and cold all the time. They perfectly adapted to that. But if you switch them, those Nelore cows, their energy requirements in Scotland would be literally eating double or triple what the Highland cow would have to eat for them to stay functional and alive. So they'd live, but they would kill your profitability. And in turn, the Highland cow up in northern Brazil, she's going to live 20 to 30 days max, and then that'll be the end of her life. So I think we have to find cattle that are adapted to their environments. Tropical adaptability, and this applies obviously to us here in the subtropics as well. I mean, we're almost in the tropics here, but this is often misunderstood, and I know this from our company. We do some gene editing for some of the big, like Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, USAID, and people try and shortcut a way to tropical adaptability. They think if you can put a slick coat on a Holstein or a slick coat on an Angus, then you're there. They're tropically adapted. But it's a much more developed ecosystem than one single trait. So I'm going to run through a few tropical adapted traits, and I encourage you guys, because you've got a breed that is adapted to the tropics, to message these and talk about them when unadapted breeds try and encroach on your market, and to look at, even within the Bonsmara breed, there are different genotypes, right? You've got cattle that are more adapted to the temperate areas, and certainly ones that are more adapted to the more hot, humid areas. So body type is important. You know, to be adapted in the tropics, you can't have extreme phenotypes. There has to be moderation in terms of bone and frame size, etc. The second thing is hide color. No one has ever done a better job on analyzing hide color than Dr. Jan Bonsmara. I mean, just to break it down to a short soundbite, basically your colors like black absorb light, so they don't reflect light, so it makes those cattle a lot hotter, especially at low altitudes. And colors like red and lighter colors reflect light, so it makes them a lot more adapted at those altitudes, because they get that light reflected and they can cool down. At higher altitudes, Black can actually be a color that works because it absorbs that ultraviolet, so it can utilize that energy, where your darker reds can do the same job just as well. A slick coat is important for numerous reasons. I mean, for reflecting light, for not allowing ticks and other insects to gain a foothold. A slick coat can be really, really important. You've got these subcutaneous muscles in the Indicus cattle, which can shake off an insect, or a tick or a fly or biting fly, wherever it is. This is a tropically adapted trait. It is interesting now that we've mapped the bovine genome and we know that the Africander is a Zanga breed, so it's high content Indicus, there's significant Indicus in your Bonsmara, and that's what makes it tropically adapted, is the Indicus. We didn't know this until, when did they map the bovine genome? 25 years ago, about not? So we're more aware of why we knew they were tropically adapted, but now we know because there's that Indicus in them. Sebum excretion, the tropically adapted cattle excrete sebum out of their pores at a much, much higher level than the straight Taurus cattle. This is an insect repellent and a sunscreen. And then extra skin, so more surface area of hide per body, and that gives you additional sweat glands so they can sweat better. All of these things make cattle tropically adaptable, and this is why I wouldn't be tempted to make your cattle look more like Bos Taurus cattle and use those Indicus traits and those tropically adapted traits, because that's what keeps them flourishing in these conditions. Functional efficiency. So this is, for me, breaks down to two things, and I'll break into different parts of efficiency too, but basically it's functional efficiency is two things. It's physiological functional efficiency, where all the body parts fit together appropriately in the right proportions. And then you've got your balance of the endocrine system, where all the glands are secreting hormones at the right level. There's balance there, and that's showing itself in the phenotype. So efficiency is a word that gets used in so many different ways, and it has so many different meanings. I mean, we've got our cow-calf efficiency. You see that Limousin cow with a calf, where you're obviously wanting a cow to wean 45 to 50% of her own body weight at 7 months. That's extremely important just from a factory scenario of output. The one caution I would give is when you take that number a little too high in a herd of cows, you can get your cows to struggle to rebreed. So you want to keep that in check. You want them to be as efficient as they can, but still have enough body condition to rebreed in the years that follow. And you'll see there too, there's a balance. I mean, 65% cow-calf efficiency sounds amazing until half of your cows don't rebreed. So keeping it balanced around 45 to 50% seems ideal. Louis spoke a lot about feedlot efficiency, and I think South Africa's really been pioneers in this with the phase C and D test right from when I was little and before that. I think it is very important to acknowledge, though, that efficiency in a feedlot and efficiency on grass are two completely different things. You can achieve cattle that can be adequate in both, but if something is efficient in the feedlot in converting grain to beef, the chances are that your highest performers in the feedlot are not going to be very good at pasture level as cows that are grass efficient. And a lot of this goes down to maturity pattern and fleshing ability. So the balance here is to find something that's adequate at feed conversion in the feedlot, and still grass efficient at the same time. I think that message maybe Europe and North America, and definitely not Australia, where people assume that, oh, this animal's feed efficient, so they're also going to be feed efficient on grass. Yeah, that's not how ruminants operate. Those are two completely different sports, and to find one that can do both is normally adequate in the feedlot, not very high in the feedlot in terms of feed efficiency. How much attention have you guys given to RFI in South Africa, residual feed intake, if any, a little bit? So I don't know how much you guys have jumped on the RFI train, but again, breaking it down to a soundbite, the whole concept, and this has got popular in a lot of areas, and it actually terrifies me, but so basically it's a big cow that eats like a little cow. And the problem with this is the energy requirements of that animal are actually never met for reproduction or for fighting disease, for milk production. So it can work in the feedlot. Like, it's actually a dream. You've got this massive animal that still grows but eats like a little animal. But when that becomes a cow on felt, if you've got a 700 kg cow, but she eats like a 500 kg cow, there's a deficit of energy requirement there. So she's not actually going to ever have enough calories to rebreed, to fight disease, or to milk. And I think that what we need to do is find cows with big appetite. And instead of having a 700 kg cow that eats like a 500 kg cow, have a 500 kg cow that eats like a 500 kg cow. I guess the message through all of this is that the animals that are going to perform in the feedlot at a high level aren't necessarily, or most often not going to be the ones that are going to perform on pasture at a high level. So we're going to have to optimize in the feedlot in order to maximize on pasture, not maximize in the feedlot, because we'll find that we're going to be a little compromised on pasture then. Okay, let's start on fertility. Okay, we're going to drive hard on this because it is the most important economic trait. I went to an amazing Angus herd on Thursday in Oklahoma. Incredible cows. But I came away there a little frustrated because they were so heavily understocked. And so the most important economic trait in a cattle operation is stocking rate, right? If we don't stock correctly, we're leaving money on the table. But within the animal itself, fertility is definitely the most important economic trait. And people have thrown numbers. Some have said it's 4 times more important than growth, some 5. I've heard as high as 10. Let's just agree it's the most important, and it's more important than growth. And this is where the animal scientists and the breed societies usually cut my mic and chase me off stage. But it is highly heritable. So fertility is extremely highly heritable, and it has to be because it's a survival trait. I think maybe the way we've been measuring fertility has shown low heritability, but if we measure fertility practically and not academically, we'll realize how highly heritable it is. So therefore, we can breed for it. Your fertile cow families, just the fact that I can say fertile cow families proves that it's highly heritable. Whenever I've got 2 sets of twins at home. The first question I ever get asked is that from which side of the family does that come from? Fertility is highly heritable. And you can phenotype it, and we'll do some phenotyping later. So it's 1 + 1 = 2. And you'll tell during this talk how bad I am at maths. In standard 8, I was kicked out of maths permanently. I was at the Bloemfontein show during exams. And when I got back and I hadn't written the exam, they said, okay, that's it, you're not doing maths anymore. So I've got halfway through standard 8 maths. So you'll be able to poke all kinds of holes in what I'm saying mathematically. But philosophically, I'm going to go toe-to-toe with you, and I will concede if I lose, I promise you, but I'm going to back myself. So 1 plus 1 equals 2. So high inherent body condition plus hormonal balance equals fertility. Okay, so if you've got a feminine cow that's easy fleshing is fertile. A masculine bull that's easy fleshing is fertile. Their repro guys are going to talk here later, so they can dispel everything I'm saying, and I'll give in to them because they know what they're doing. But if you think of your 13-year-old cow that's calved every single year, you're going to see two things in her. She's feminine and she's easy fleshing. And that is self-evident. So earlier I said, are we selecting for fertility or are we selecting against infertility? Okay. Culling open cows is not selecting for fertility. Culling open cows is selecting against infertility. So you're doing the right thing, but I'm saying, like, at a young age, we have got to identify those animals that have hormonal balance at a young age. So the bulls that are showing masculine traits at a young age, the females that are feminine at a young age. The first females to put on that layer of fat naturally on felt condition compared to their contemporaries, that's phenotyping for fertility. Now, we saw that Nelore herd in Brazil. There's a herd called Navaraí near Uberaba in Brazil. Nelore, if you can do anything with fertility with Nelore, you can do it with any breed of cattle. They're tall, they're wild, they're lean, they're the most awful cattle to work with. And this Navaraí herd, what they did, they sell about 600 bulls a year, and about 25 years ago, all their bull calves at 9 months, they would semen test, and if there was live sperm, they wouldn't freeze it, they just check. If there's live sperm, those bulls would be moved into a keeper pen. Okay, so those were the bulls that they would potentially select sires out of. And every one of their females were exposed to calve at 2. Okay, this is like 1,000 heifers at a time. 25 years ago, they were getting 5 to 6% of those females actually calving at 2 and then at 3 again. Today, the vast majority of their heifers are calving at 2 and then again as cows at 3. That's called selecting for fertility. Now, if fertility is the most important economic trait, then naturally it makes sense to select for it. Any other industry would do that. But there's certain things that you have to expect. The number one is your phenotype's going to change. Those Navaraí Nelore look nothing like the ones I showed you on the screen. They're more medium framed. The bulls are heavier fronted. They've got the classic testosterone balance and that hormonal balance. And the females are easier fleshing, so they're fatter little cows, more medium frame, and extremely feminine. So I think that the next frontier for all of us as cattle breeders is to decide if we can breed for fertility and not just against infertility. Longevity, for me, this is an easy sell. The most expensive thing we do in a cattle operation, other than buying feed, is keeping replacement females, because we've got these females that are doing nothing. They're just passengers for a long period of time, and it becomes really expensive. So the more replacement females we have to hold on to, the more expensive that large expense becomes. And the way to avoid that is to make our cows productive for as long as possible. So really try and select genetics out of your cows that live a long time and calve every single year, because then you're selecting for longevity, which is such a good, important trait. This is something I've observed, and it's South Africa's not immune to this either, but what's happened is I've used an Angus example at the top there. This is a herd in the US that sells close to 2,000 bulls, and they're a performance herd, okay? They breed for maximum carcass, so marbling and ribeye, and they breed for maximum growth. And what's happened is, as you can see, the females look a little bit masculine and the bulls look a little bit feminine. It's called sexual monomorphism. You go into a herd of cows and you can't find the bull. What size should a cow be? Okay, what's the ideal optimum size of a cow? So this is a 7-point plan that I've devised, but I'm always ready to tweak it and add something or take something away. So in the question and answers, we can play with that a bit. But I think the general rule of thumb is, the first thing is if you provide the appropriate nutrition that commercial guys in your area provide, so you don't starve them and you don't spoil them, that's a good first step. The second one is, depending on where you are in the world, so I'm assuming you guys are all calving at 3 here, right? That's for the most part. So that your females have to have calved by 39 months would be the second point on that. Now, there are parts of more temperate, easier conditions, like the northern parts of the US, southern parts of Australia, where everyone is calving at 2, but let's say for here, 39 months. And they have to conceive in, let's call it a 90-day breeding season, and as we move along, we take that down to 60 and maybe down to 45. So let's start at 90. These numbers are actually not important. You can put whatever numbers you want in there. For me, it's about the system, right? That you have the system involved. The fourth thing is they do this every year and on time, so within that season. Okay, those numbers are important. We actually do need these cattle to calve every year within that season. And the fifth thing is to establish a minimum weaning weight at 7 months. So your commercial guys in the area, depending where you are, where we were, the calves are actually quite heavy. So a 220, 230 kg calf was minimum for us. Now, the other areas where the same genetics, that's going to be 180. Okay, so it all depends on your environment and your climate. But I think it's very important to have that minimum in mind when you're selecting. It stops your cows from getting too small. Okay. The calf must be at least 45% of the cow's weight at 7 months, and you can move that to 50 if you want, but that stops your cows from getting too big. Okay. Now, what the thought process behind this is that if you do all 6 of those steps, the seventh step is, the seventh point is that, and after 3 or 4 years, every single cow on your farm is the right size, because those 6 steps kick out the extremes. There's no way an extreme stays within those systems. And the more you squash those numbers, when you start bringing it down to 39, fat or inherent body condition, this is a word that if not messaged properly and not explained properly, can really be misunderstood and mispracticed. So basically, when I'm talking about fat, I'm talking about high inherent body condition. So animals that are on the veldt with their contemporaries that have more condition on them than their contemporaries. There are 2 ways to make animals fat. One is genetically, and one is nutritionally. The second way is a lot more expensive, okay? And the second way can really affect their reproduction and their productivity because of how it can ruin the animal's physiology. So is high inherent body condition good, bad, or ugly? Feedlots around the world want lean cattle that grow, okay? And there's good reason for it. Those guys know what they're doing. And the packers, the processors, the abattoirs, they also like that because they can add a lot of muscle and add volume to it. So there's the argument for lean cattle that grow, later maturing leaner cattle. Okay. So my argument is going to be for earlier maturing, easier fleshing cattle. And there are a few things that these cattle do a lot better than leaner, later maturing cattle do. The first thing is, again, self-evident. The females are in estrus at a younger age, the bulls are fertile at a younger age. The second thing is, from a grazing perspective, these are non-selective grazers. They put their heads down and they eat everything in front of them. They're gluttons. They have a high leptin hormone production in their body. And because of that, they eat everything, and and then it becomes self-perpetuating where they're consuming a lot of food, it's creating fat, fat produces more leptin, that makes them eat more, and they literally, it's a positive trait, that ability to consume food without being selective. The next thing is temperament. These cattle have a better temperament. The earlier maturing, easier fleshing cattle, and we'll get to skull shape later and the shape of the head that goes with this, and you'll see that they have a much better temperament to them. And then they're obviously more fertile because of that earlier estrus and the earlier age of fertility, but when the steak hits the plate, it's a better eating experience as well. If managed the same way as a leaner, later maturing animal, fed for the same amount of time, you get a better eating experience because fatty meat gives flavor. And there's more tenderness in these cattle's carcasses too. So there are pros and cons. There are two ways of looking at this. This is why I veer towards that earlier maturing, easier fleshing type. And if you're stocking appropriately, you can run more cows than you would with a leaner, later maturing type. Okay, now this slide you might think, no, you've come to the wrong talk, but I am going to try and tie it back into livestock production. So the United Nations, there's a lot of things that it really is quite irrelevant for and maybe doesn't add much value to the global community, but what they do very well is they're very good at measuring things, and they're very good at data capturing. They've got one index called the happiness index, and they take about 100 data points and they put them all together and they rank each country around the world from first to last in terms of happiness. So as you can see, that list, you can read it yourself, Finland, Denmark, Iceland at the top, all the way down to New Zealand. So when I looked at that list, obviously, for happiness, you need people that are flourishing and you need well-being amongst people. So if a country is happy and you look at that list, then there must be certain principles you can draw from that and you put it into a farming enterprise or a family farm or even a corporate farm. And the three things I've noticed in all those happy countries every year is they do three things right. And the first thing is they're free market economies. So it's the people that decide the value of a product and a service. Okay? Think about that in your farming enterprise too. The second thing is they maximize energy. So no matter how that energy, what form it's coming in, whether it's fossil fuels or wind or hydro or nuclear, they're maximizing it. They're using as much energy as they can. So in the farming enterprise too, think about that, how you can maximize that energy. And the third part of it is they've all liberated women. And this is obvious. So any country that only utilizes 50% of its population in terms of educating them, putting them into big business roles, allowing them to have leadership positions, is optimizing and maximizing its potential. Why are none of the Arabian Gulf countries on here? They're rich. They're maximizing energy. A lot of them are becoming free market economies because they haven't liberated women. So they're only using 50% of the human capital in their country to move that country forward. So the moral argument here is self-evident, but the more salmon, trout. Now, we're not going to feed 8 billion people with kudu and trout. It's just unsustainable. There's no way we're going to do that. Okay. Now, what we can feed 8 billion people with is chickens and pigs. And we found chickens have evolved in the most amazing way. Like they've given themselves a blank check for forever because they've learned to live so close to humans, and they rely on us and we rely on them so closely that gene is going to continue forever. But the elite cities are putting a lot of pressure on chicken production, saying it's, it's not it's sustainable but not humane, where the deer and the salmon and trout are very humane but not sustainable. So we're right in the middle with cattle, sheep, goat production of being humane and sustainable. And I think that this is maybe a message that our marketing groups need to focus on. We've got a very good point of difference there that we can use. There are a lot of challenges though. I mean, this is not just I'm not a cheerleader. There are some challenges. And so the one positive thing for you guys, and when I speak to a lot of my farming friends in South Africa, they're always worried and complaining about how the government doesn't care about farmers in South Africa and this, and they don't even know what we're doing. The very best thing possible for you guys is for the government not to care about you. Like you in do you know how many countries, every country in Europe, so many countries like Australia, New Zealand, Canada, would wish as farmers that their government didn't care about them. Their governments care so much about them that they're giving quotas on how much they can produce. They're telling them they have to cut their numbers down by 30%. If they build a dam, it has to be passed through government under different specs. They can hardly build a fence anymore without government authorization. That halts a lot of progress in farming communities. So, I mean, again, you might think maybe I'm just jet lagged, but honestly, the best thing possible is for your government not to care about you as an animal producer or as a food producer. Just let you do it the way you want to do it, let you grow the way you want to grow. There are a lot of challenges that come with governments being very close to the producers. Subsidies. So those miniature cattle, Highland and Galloways, I'm going to be going back to Norway in September. I get a lot of requests from Norway for miniature Galloway, Hereford, Angus. And the reason is they get subsidized per head per year. So if they can have a whole lot of miniatures, they can probably run double or even more of a normal cow, so they get more subsidies. That produces a very, very false market. It's not a true market. And it's the same with subsidies. When you apply for subsidies in Europe, Australia, New Zealand, South Korea, Japan, every one of your animals has got a passport, like we've got if we travel, and everything you do with that animal, move it to the next farm, vaccinate it, anything's in that passport. So now the government knows exactly how many cattle you've got, and how many sheep you've got, and how many goats you've got. So when they want to put a carbon tax in and cut the number of animals in your country by 30%, they know how many animals you've got. So you've got to hand in 30% of those animals and passports over a certain amount of time and cut them down. When there's no subsidies and then they never knew how many you had in the first place. So you can carry on as you like, and they would never know. The same hook that takes you to the top is the same hook that pulls you down again, and that's what these guys have found. The same hook that gave them subsidies is now trying to cut their numbers with carbon taxes. Quotas is another issue that creates a false market. Those Belgian blue cattle, again in Belgium, if the government quotas that they can have 18 cattle on their property, the farmers start maximizing and becoming quite extreme with what kind of 18 cattle they'll have on their property. And this also creates a false market. These animals, none of their calves are natural. Everyone is C-section out the side. I mean, Monet, you'll tell us how many C-sections a cow can have, but I don't think it can have more than 2 or 3. 2. 3, yeah. So after 3, they have to cull those cows. So it creates another false market. That Brahman bull, I was in Cuba a couple of times judging their national show, and this Brahman bull was sold. He was my national champion bull, and he's not the best or the worst you've ever seen. He's just a bull. And they sold him for the equivalent of $400, so it's about 7,500 rand the next day. And I said, look, bull like that for that kind of money. And basically the farmer was explaining that it's just a right pocket, left pocket transaction. They're all Fidel Castro, or then Raul Castro's cattle. Communism, what it does is it disincentivizes anyone to really breed cattle well, because there's no reward, so you just start multiplying them, and there's no breeding involved. And that's what I've seen a lot in those big herds. Is the concept of trying to improve is gone, because there's no incentive. You don't get rewarded for it. Socialism does something a little bit similar. This is the Pampas in Argentina, one of the best places in the world to run cattle. And in the early 2000s, their president at the time, Christina Kirchner, she flirted quite heavily with socialism. And what she did is implemented a ban of 90% of their beef exports. So what this did was make beef very cheap for the people in Buenos Aires and the other Mendoza, the other big cities, which seems like a very noble and wonderful thing for a president to do. But these Pampas farmers, they weren't going to produce beef and sell it for cheap. So they replaced all that incredible land that was being used for beef cattle and started planting soybeans for China. And during that reign of 8 years, Argentina went from 60 million cattle to 50 million cattle. And the price of beef was higher than it had ever been before because of that drop of 10 million cattle. So social engineering, whether it's with humans or cattle, it never works, because there's always unintended consequences that come with it. And again, that's Ukraine 10 days ago. I was in Russia last July. I was in Iran in November. I've been in Palestine and Israel. Guys, we are very fortunate where we live that this isn't happening, because it really can restrict the way in which livestock agriculture happens. This is a Dinka herdsman in South Sudan. Mordenay hasn't listened to a cow in South Africa is big enough. I don't know. I mean, I haven't seen all of them. Is she big enough? The average cow?
Depends on your environment. You've got environments that's going over, and environments that's a bit under.
So if I can depoliticize your answer, what you're saying is that some of them are too big. Okay. But the average is about right. Okay. If the average Bonsmara cow in South Africa is the right size, then breed average for yearling weight and 18-month weight is enough. That's logic. I mean, there's, I don't know how much more logic you can get than that. What we do, unfortunately, this is going to frustrate the marketers a bit, because you're going to have to find marketers who are prepared to come to you and say, you know what, I've just found a bull that you'd really need to look at. He's the most average bull I've ever seen. He is so average. Like, he's so average. And that average bull is the profit maker. That one that isn't extreme in any of those traits, but has been optimized. And if EPDs and EBVs genomics works, which I'm arguing they do, we can find that optimization perfectly. The danger we've seen is the marketers who come and market the top 1%, top 5%. You start maximizing those traits, and a lot of those traits are antagonistic to each other, and they don't work very well together. And sometimes you can put those things together, but then your energy requirements go through the roof. So you know what, actually today I just want to give an average speech. How about like that? I just want to give the most average speech I've ever, that's my mission for today. The other argument is that they don't work. And this argument can be in your favor if you do measure correctly. But if I argue that, and unfortunately this argument doesn't work as well with Bonsmara guys in South Africa because I know that you guys do. Really well built, it's beautiful, it's nice to look at, it's functional. It elevates me so you guys can see the auctioneer when he's selling cattle. But you notice what I haven't done. I haven't talked about how good the bricklayer was at laying the brick and how nicely the saw that cut the wood was, how good the sandpaper was that sanded this wood down. I think what we do in the cattle industry a little too often is we focus so much on the tools that we forget to look at the product. Maybe we need to just focus on the product, respect the tools that made the product, but what we actually need to be looking at is the product itself. The other thing in our toolbox that we've got is we've got so many different ways of propagating these genetics, whether it's through natural breeding, through artificial insemination, through embryo transfer. Hendrik's going to give us a demonstration and talk later. These tools are, if you're serious about genetic change and hopefully genetic gain, if you're making the right decisions, then AI and ET become a big thing. You yourself as a breeder identify the cow that's at the age that's produced a lot of good calves, that's been fertile, that has longevity, and now you have an opportunity to just make more of them more quickly. The one advantage you get from embryos is you get a genetic gain from the Limousin bull on the right. When you see how small his scrotum is, how straight he is through his shoulder and his hind leg, he doesn't have the fundamentals that we spoke about earlier. So it doesn't matter how much muscle or any other quality he's got in his physiology, he actually is irrelevant because he didn't pass begin with eat, walk, and reproduce. Udder quality is really important in our females. So we really have to focus on getting females with a very level udder floor. We need to focus on getting that fore-udder attached into the body wall nice and snugly. When we look at our udders from behind, we want some height and width in that udder, so there's rear udder attachment. And we want those udders suspended nicely above the hocks. You know, if the Holsteins and the Jerseys can suspend their udders above the hocks, beef cows certainly have no excuse for that. This is very important for longevity. Also, the teat size and placement, just the correct teat size, teats that are pliable, that have good texture to them, all pointing plumb down and nicely spaced. Genuinely and generally, what you find is functionally efficient cattle have good udders because it's a reproduction trait, so it goes through all the physiological parts of an animal that have to do with reproduction are in order. As you can see, the cow on the right isn't going to last very long because the udder floor is collapsed. There is no fore-udder attachment, and the ligaments are very badly suspended. What's in a head? I think South Africa is about as good as any country for evaluating skulls. Send them to Louis. If you guys have got anything positive to say, you can send it to this email address here. If you want to chat about anything, we'd love to be open. Or we can ask questions later in the Q&A. So if you've got any questions, we're going to do that this afternoon. Yeah, thank you very much, guys. I'm looking forward to chatting to you as we move forward.